I can hear someone crying.
We must be very careful.
Hello? The voice came from behind the door, small and careful, like a bird testing whether a windowsill was safe. Nora Hayes stopped with her key halfway to the lock. The basement of the Ashbrook County Courthouse was old, and old buildings make old sounds, and for a long moment she stood in the cold and told herself she had heard pipes, or wind, or nothing at all. Then the voice came again, patient, practiced, the voice of someone who had learned to wait a long time between tries. I know you're out there. I can see your shoes. She looked down at her own shoes. Then she looked at the door, steel painted the color of dust. A padlock rusted into a copper beard around the keyhole. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 22nd of December. The courthouse officially closed, and Nora Hayes had come back to the town she had avoided for 12 years to read exactly one file. Now, something behind the locked door was talking to her. "What's your name?" she asked, and was glad her voice did not shake. A silence long enough for 3 heartbeats passed. "My name's not for people who lie. I'm not lying. Everyone lies." A pause, and then, quieter, "The lady said she'd come back. She always says she'll come back." Nora pressed her palm flat against the cold steel. "What does this lady look like?" "She smells like honey. She has a crack in her voice when she sings. She told me to be brave, and she said gulls always find their way home." Nora's hand dropped from the door. She stood very still in the dusty light, because her mother had been dead 11 years, and her mother had been the only person in the world who said that. Gulls always find their way home. She had said it to Nora the morning Nora left for law school, and to Maggie 1,000 times before that, and now the sentence was coming back to her out of the dark behind a locked door, in the voice of a child she had never met. She never remembered opening the door. Later she understood that she had taken the bolt cutters from the janitor's closet, and later she would find the broken padlock on the concrete and her own white knuckles and no memory of the walk in between. The door swung inward, and the smell of the room came out to meet her, dust and old paper and something small and warm. And in the corner, on a cot with a mattress thin as a prayer book, sat a boy. He was 6, maybe 7. His knees were drawn up to his chin, and he looked at her with eyes the color of the harbor in January. He wore a sweater that must have come from a grown woman's closet. The sleeves rolled and rolled again. Above his cot, taped to the cinder block, was a crayon drawing, a lighthouse on a cliff, a woman with dark hair waving from the round window, a small yellow bird riding the air over the water. Under the cot lay a photograph worn soft as cloth, a young woman laughing on a set of stone steps, a young man beside her holding 2 cups of coffee. Nora knew the curve of that cliff, knew the missing third rung of the gallery rail the child had carefully left out, because the picture was exact the way only a child with nothing else in the world to draw can be exact. The Ashbrook light had been empty for 15 years. Her sister had once promised to fix it up, the way people in their 20s promise things, before they learn what fixing means. "That's my mother," the boy said, watching her face. "She's coming back. She said so." "Where is your mother?" "Out getting evidence." He said the word the way other children said zoo or mall. "She said when she comes back, we're going to live somewhere with a door that opens." Nora sat down on the floor. It was not a decision. Her legs made it. "What's in the room where you sleep at night?" "This room," the boy said. "For how long?" He thought about it honestly, the way children do when they have decided a person is safe. "Since the snow was tall." Then he looked past her at the open door, at the world, and his face did something too old. "Are you going to tell?" Nora Hayes had not been to Ashbrook in 12 years. She had built her life out of distance, a family law practice in the city, a reputation for taking the cases nobody else would take. She had come home in December because Judge Amelia Frost had written to her firm requesting an outside attorney to review a sealed guardianship file, a request that carried Nora's name on it, which was not a coincidence. The true version of why she had stayed away was smaller and worse. Nora had been supposed to be at her sister's house the night Maggie died. There had been a phone call at 9, her sister's voice low and flat in a way it had never been before. And Nora, 22 years old, tired, quietly and shamefully jealous of her sister's easy, glowing life, had said she was too busy. She had promised to come the next morning. 12 years of next mornings. The fire had taken the old keeper's cottage on the bluff, and it had taken Maggie with it. The town mourned her the way it mourns its best weather. Victor Hale paid for the funeral, stood at the grave with a face like carved grief, and spent the next decade becoming unforgettable. The new library, the new school wing, the clinic, the Margaret Hale Children's Pavilion. Because a man who loses everything, he had said once, softly, in public, learns what matters. The sealed file was thinned for 6 months of litigation. In the matter of the guardianship of Lucas Hale, Victor Hale, petitioner. Mother, Margaret Hayes Hale, deceased, per a death certificate from a county in another state. Nora read it in the basement office while the rain started against the high windows, and she remembered that a death certificate had come to her by mail 12 years ago too, and she had never been able to make the dates on it sit still in her head, the way dates do when they are wrong. She did not tell anyone. That night she lay awake at the inn on Harbor Street, and every time she closed her eyes she heard the voice behind the door. And at 4 in the morning she understood with a cold, clean clarity that the boy had been crying every afternoon at 4, and that the whole town had been walking past his door for 6 months, and no one had heard anything at all. The next morning an old man with a push broom came around the corner of the basement corridor and found her standing outside the steel door. He wore the courthouse janitor's uniform, green, worn thin at the elbows. "You're not the first to hear him," he said. "I'm Otis. I bring him his supper. I've been bringing him his supper since the snow was tall. You bringing him something better, maybe. The boy says his mother will come back." Mum. Otis nodded to himself. He never had a light in there. Not one. So I got him a night light. It's a star. He said it without any particular pride, as if supplying a child with a star was simply a janitor's job. He cries at 4, every day, like a clock. That's when his mama used to come, when he was small. Children keep the time of the people they love. A boy in trouble is not a boy to turn in. That's my opinion. Do you know who the boy's mother is? Don't need to know, Otis said. Boy's got her face. That's enough. That evening Nora sat on the bed at the inn with her coat still on and held her mother's pendant in her palm, the little crescent moon on its worn chain. Her mother had given one to Nora on her 18th birthday, and its twin had gone to Maggie on hers. She had worn it for 16 years without once taking it off, and now she turned it over in the lamplight and heard the boy's voice saying she smells like honey. There had been two. There had always been two. The hearing was at 9 the next morning, and the courtroom was full of people Nora did not know, which was strange, because she had grown up among them. Victor Hale sat at the petitioner's table in a gray suit, his hair gone silver at the temples, and he looked exactly like the man who had built the children's hospital. Grave, kind, patient. Beside him, his lawyer, Marcus Webb, arranged papers the way a chess player arranges pieces. Webb made the motion. Permanent guardianship of the minor child, Lucas Hale, to the natural father. He told the story the way it had been written in the file, smooth as a river over stones. A marriage, a loss, a man who had spent 12 years mourning, a son discovered living with the mother's sister in another state after the mother's death, a father who only wanted what was left of his family. When it was Victor's turn, he stood and spoke without notes. He spoke about the pavilion. He spoke about grief as a teacher. He mentioned, gently, that the boy had his mother's eyes. A woman in the gallery cried into a handkerchief. Victor turned to the bench, and his voice dropped. "Your Honor, I have lost everything once. I ask only for what is left." The judge's face did not change. She looked at Nora's table, where a woman in a plain coat had not moved. "Hayes, do you have something to tell this court?" Nora stood. She had carried the boy's drawing into the courtroom folded inside her coat, and she could feel it against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Your Honor, I request an emergency continuance and a review in chambers. I have new evidence concerning the child's whereabouts. Marcus Webb was on his feet. Your Honor, this is theater. The child is in a safe placement. My client is the natural father. The child is not in any placement. Nora said, the child has been living in this building for 6 months. The silence that landed in the courtroom was wide enough to stand in. Judge Frost looked at Victor Hale, whose face had not moved, and said, quietly, my chambers, both counsel. Now, in chambers, Nora unfolded the drawing on the judge's desk, smoothing the creases with her palm. The lighthouse, the woman in the window, the yellow bird. She told the judge about the corridor at 4 o'clock, and the voice that said, I can see your shoes, and the song, and what the song meant, and about the star Otis had hung for the boy who had never had a light. She explained that under the top drawing there was a stack of older ones, and in every one of them the woman in the window was waving, because the boy had drawn her waving 1,000 times, waiting for a wave back. Judge Frost picked up the drawing by its corners. This is the Ashbrook light, the woman in the window. She studied it for a long time. Get me the Guardian ad litem. Daniel Mercer came in without knocking. That was the first Nora had seen of him in 12 years. Daniel Mercer, whose name she had carried out of this town like a stone in her shoe, now in the dark suit of a man who argues for children, the court-appointed guardian for Lucas Hale. He stopped in the doorway, and for 1 second his face did something it could not take back. Then he was smooth again. Your Honor, I was told there was a development. The judge told him. His knuckles went white, one by one. I'd like to see the boy, Daniel said. No, Nora said. I'm his guardian. Then explain the last 6 months, she said. Explain how the guardian of Lucas Hale didn't know his ward was sleeping in a locked room with a paper star. And then, because 12 years of next mornings had to come out somewhere, I know that boy's mother, Daniel. I know the song he hums. I know whose face he's got. And you stood in this building and told this court you didn't know where he was. Daniel looked at her. I did, and I would do it again. The door to the outer office opened, and Otis came in holding a boy by the hand. Lucas wore the sweater still, sleeves rolled, and he looked around the room full of grown-ups with the grave, flat patience of a person who has learned that adults are weather. Then he saw Daniel, and something broke open in his face. You said you'd keep her safe. His voice was small and hard, a stone. You said she went out to get evidence, and you said you'd keep her safe, and you were supposed to be here, and you weren't. He stopped and swallowed his own words, and the way he swallowed them was the most adult sound Nora had ever heard a child make. Daniel stood up slowly, the way you stand up for a funeral. Lucas, she is safe. She is coming back. I swear it. You swore before. Otis cleared his throat. Your Honor, I'm the one kept him fed. I'll take whatever comes of that. But the boy here ain't got nobody but his mother and the woman who found him. And this one here, who comes by the basement door at night after everyone's gone and stands there a while and doesn't come in. That's the whole of it. Nora turned to look at Daniel, and the room went very quiet. And in the quiet she understood a thing she had not understood in 12 years. He had been coming to the basement door at night, not to keep the secret, to make sure the boy was still alive inside it. The judge sent Otis and Lucas out, closed the door, and sat down. Mr. Mercer, before I decide whether to hold you in contempt or whether to give the boy to the man in the gray suit, I need to understand what you would do again. All of it. Now, Daniel told it like a man pulling his own teeth. 12 years ago, Maggie had come to him 4 days before the fire, with a bruise on her arm shaped like a hand, and a fear that had no bottom to it. Victor had started following her. He had told her, in his quiet way, that she would never leave him, that the kind of man who builds a hospital can make a person disappear and call it grief, and no one would ever ask. Daniel had believed her. He had helped her. 4 days later, the cottage burned, and Victor's men came looking for a woman and a baby who were already gone. And Daniel had stood in the road and watched the fire and let the town bury an empty grave. "Where is my sister now?" Nora heard herself ask, and her voice was strange to her, as if it had spent 12 years learning what it was saying. 2 weeks ago, Victor's investigators found the lighthouse. Daniel's voice did not waver, but his hands found the arms of the chair and held on. "Maggie sent me a message that morning. I couldn't get to her, and I couldn't get to the boy. So I got a message to Otis, and I put Lucas in the only room in the county nobody would think to look in. I told Maggie to run to the Capitol, to the state investigator, who has been building a file on Victor Hale for 3 years, and to come back when she had the proof. I spoke to her last night. She's in the Capitol. She's coming. You spoke to her." Nora's voice was very quiet. "In 12 years, you never once told me." "I never once told you," Daniel said, and the room held still, because Victor's people watched everyone who loved her. Everyone. "You were the one safe thing about her, Nora, because the town believed you didn't care, because you stayed away, because you were angry enough to stay away. I used that. I used your grief like a wall. It kept her alive." The judge removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Mercer, you have committed any number of crimes this morning, and we will sort out precisely which ones after Christmas. Right now, I am more interested in the ones committed by the man in the gray suit." She looked at Nora. "Ems, Hayes, I am placing the minor child in your temporary custody as of now. The hearing on the permanent petition is continued to 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Christmas Eve. Sealed. And if one word of what happened in this room reaches the street before then, I will hold whoever leaked it in contempt. And I am not known for my sense of humor about contempt." In the corridor, Daniel took an envelope out of his coat and held it out to Nora. "From Maggie. She said to tell you there's a room with a door that opens. Inside there was a key, old, worn bright at the head, and a scrap of paper with her sister's handwriting. For the lighthouse. Fix it up. You promised." That afternoon it rained, gray and sideways, and the town lost its edges. Nora walked Lucas to the inn with the boy's hand in hers, his other hand holding the paper star Otis had given him. Lucas looked at everything. The wreaths, the lights going on early in the shop windows, a dog with the wide, careful eyes of a person seeing a country for the first time. "This is the whole town?" he asked. "This is the whole town. It's nice," he said, politely, "the way you praise a meal you did not expect to get." And Nora laughed. And then she stopped, because the sound surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. She put him to bed with the star on the nightstand, and she sat on the wet bench in the small park by the harbor, and found Daniel Mercer already there, where they had sat at 17. "You still come every night?" "Every night, since the snow was tall." He looked out at the water. 4 o'clock. He cries. "Did you learn that?" "Every day at 4. She used to come at 4. When he was small." He turned his collar up against the wind. "He's singing her song, the gulls. Yesterday I stood in that corridor, and I heard you singing it back." Nora said nothing. The rain found the harbor. She looked at the lighthouse across the water, dark against the gray, and thought about a woman with a crack in her voice, and a boy in a locked room, and 12 years of her own anger, which had turned out to be a wall that had kept her sister alive, which was somehow the worst and the best news she had ever received. "I hated you," she said. "I know. I hated you for moving on, for doing good in the town where I couldn't breathe. I know." One of the harbor gulls came in low over the water, found nothing, and went back out to sea. "He has a photograph," Nora said, "under his cot. You and her on the lighthouse steps, laughing, 2 cups of coffee. She kept you, Daniel. 12 years of hiding, and she kept your picture where the boy could see it. There's one of you too," he said, without turning, "in the box she carried out of the lighthouse." I put it in there myself the night she ran, so she'd have the whole family. He was quiet a moment. You wore the moon. Nora touched the little crescent at her collar and did not answer. If you had told me one time, I would have helped you keep her safe. I would have been a better wall than anger. You would have been watched, he said. You were the only one who ever asked a single question about that fire. After the funeral, you went to the county clerk and asked to see the fire report. The clerk told Victor himself, and Victor sat in his office and said to me, "That girl is like a dog with a bone." And I remember thinking, that's why I love her. And I remember thinking, that's why she can never know. Christmas Eve came in gray and cold, and the courthouse square filled up before 8, because news travels in a small town the way weather does, from nowhere, everywhere at once. The Children's Hospital Board stood together near the door. Two detectives in plain clothes stood by the vestibule drinking coffee from cardboard cups, and everybody pretended not to see them, and everybody saw them. Victor Hale was in his gray suit. Marcus Webb moved papers. The woman who had cried at the first hearing was there again, and she was not crying today. She was looking at Victor Hale with her mouth set in a line. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Frost looked out at the room full of her neighbors. Ems, Hayes, you may state your recommendation. Nora stood. On the table in front of her lay the drawing, and the paper star, and the photograph she had found that morning in Lucas's pocket. She had not asked him where he got it. She already knew. Your Honor, I recommend the petition be denied. She felt the room shift. This court was told the petitioner is a grieving father and a pillar of this town. This court was told the child's mother is dead. I found the child living in a locked room no one remembered, fed by a janitor, sleeping under a paper star, singing a song that only one family in this world knows. I recommend this court hear from the child's mother. You could hear the room stop breathing. Victor Hale stood. Your Honor, this is a fraud. There is no mother. I have a death certificate. Mr. Hale, the judge said, you are not on the stand. Sit down. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Margaret Hayes Hale walked in. She was thinner than the photographs, 12 years thinner, and her coat did not fit, and a town does not forget its best weather. She walked down the aisle the way people walk in dreams, and Victor Hale's face did something it had spent 12 years learning how not to do. Hello, Victor, Maggie said, in the voice that had a crack in it. You buried me nicely. The flowers were beautiful. I read about them in the paper. She testified the way a person testifies who has told the truth to no one for 12 years, all at once, and in order, and without decoration. She told the court about the courtship, and the wedding, and the way the charm had curdled slowly, like milk, until the day she understood she was married to a man who collected people the way he collected buildings, and who would never let her leave. She pushed up her sleeve and showed the courtroom the pale crossing lines of the old scar on her forearm, and Marcus Webb asked for an adjournment and was told, in the patient voice of a woman who had heard everything twice, to sit down. She told them about the fire. 4 days before it, she had gone to Daniel Mercer, her brother's best friend, at that time a boy with a law degree and a surplus of courage. The night of the fire, Victor's men had come for her, and she had been gone, and she had lain in the dark of the lighthouse for 3 days, holding her baby, listening to the town hold her funeral. I heard the bells, she said. I heard them ring for me, and I held his ears, so he wouldn't hear them. She told them about 12 years inside one story. The lighthouse fixed up in secret, room by room, with money she earned cleaning houses as a woman with no past. The boy learning to read from library books, learning the world from a window. 2 weeks ago, a car in the harbor traffic that circled once, and then circled again, and the man in the front seat who had been one of Victor's men when she was 24, and was still one of Victor's men. She had hidden her son in the only room in the county no one would look in. She had gone to the Capitol with a box of evidence she had been building for 11 years. Bank records and phone records and the names of 2 men who had been paid to set a fire. I gave it to the state investigator the day my son went into that room, she said. I thought it would take a week. It has taken 6. And my little boy has been singing our song at 4 o'clock every afternoon for a mother who could not come. And I have heard every note of. The judge asked to see the child, and the bailiff brought Lucas in. And Nora watched him walk the length of the courtroom in his too big sweater, holding the paper star in both hands like a lantern. And the whole room looked at him the way you look at the thing you almost lost. Judge Frost came down off the bench, which was a thing no one in that courtroom had ever seen her do, and she knelt in front of him. Do you know who I am? You're the judge, Lucas said. My mother says judges keep people safe. Your mother is very smart. Lucas, do you know your father? Yes. He said it plainly, the way you say yes to a question with an easy answer. He's the man who hurt my mama. And then, because children do not know how to be careful with a room full of adults, he added, he bought us a house. And then he broke her arm with the door. And he said if I ever told, he put her in the ground for real. The courtroom had gone so quiet you could hear the rain start up again on the roof. Victor Hale stood up, and then he stopped, because Daniel Mercer was also standing, and behind him the 2 detectives had put down their cardboard cups. Daniel was sworn in the way any witness is sworn in, with his hand on the book and his voice even, and he told the court what he had told the judge the day before, but slower, and with the names of the men, and the road, and the fire. He told the court that he had lied for 12 years, that he had let a town bury an empty grave, that he had done it all to keep a woman and a child alive. Your Honor, I have broken the law, and I would do every bit of it again, starting tomorrow morning, if it meant that boy in the big sweater gets to grow up. Maggie asked to be heard once more, and the judge nodded. Maggie reached under her collar and pulled out a little chain, and on it a worn crescent moon, and she held it up so the light caught it. She looked at Nora, and Nora took out her own, the twin, and held it up, and the 2 moons hung in the quiet of the courtroom like a sentence already written. There was a jeweler on Harbor Street who made 2 of these in 1987 for a woman with 2 daughters. Maggie said, the woman is gone now. Both daughters are here. And that boy with the paper star is the only reason any of this happened at all. Judge Frost put her hands flat on the bench. The guardianship petition is denied. The minor child is placed in the temporary custody of his maternal aunt, and the mother's custody shall be restored upon this court's review of the state's file, which review I will conduct personally before lunch. She looked at Victor Hale, and her voice did not change, and it was the most terrible sound in the room. Mr. Hale, you will remain in this building. There are 2 officers in the vestibule, and they have been very patient. The bells of First Church began to ring as the room emptied. 12 strokes, noon, Christmas Eve, and the people of Ashbrook poured out into the wet square, and some of them were talking in loud, defending voices, and some of them were silent, and all of them looked up at the sky, where the gulls had come in off the harbor, circling the steeple, as if they had been waiting for the news. They took Victor Hale out the back door before the square could watch, and by 3 o'clock a tarp had gone up over his name on the children's pavilion, and by dark someone had lettered a sign with a marker and taped it over the tarp. Maggie's house, it said, and Maggie stood in front of it in the falling dark, with her sister beside her and the boy in the big sweater holding her hand. She did not cry, because she had spent 12 years not crying, but her hand shook, and Nora held it, and that was enough. The town came out that night with candles. It was not organized. That was not the town's way. Some came to argue for Victor to people who had believed. Some came to apologize to people they had not spoken to in years. And a surprising number came simply to stand in the cold with a flame, because something important had happened, and they did not yet have words for it. Otis stood at the edge of the square in his green jacket, and when Lucas saw him, he ran, and Otis bent down, and the boy threw his arms around the old man's neck, and Otis held him for a long moment. You come by the courthouse tomorrow. I'll show you the boiler room. A boy ought to know his home. That night, For the first time in 6 months, the corridor at the bottom of the courthouse stairs stood empty at 4 o'clock, and the room behind the steel door was quiet. And Otis drank his coffee and heard the quiet the way other men hear music. Christmas Eve dinner was at the lighthouse, which was not the ruin of Nora's memory at all. Maggie had fixed it, room by room, year by year, when no one was looking, a coastline of small repairs, each one a year of living. There was a tree in the round room, small and honest, and candles, and soup and bread. And then the door opened, and Daniel came in, and no one had invited him, and no one had to. Lucas looked up from the table and said, "You came in," and Daniel said, "Every night, since the snow was tall." And the boy considered this, and nodded, and went back to his bread, which was, coming from Lucas, a full pardon. Nora walked out onto the gallery afterward. Above the water, the wind sharp and clean, the way it gets after a storm has finished with a place. Daniel came out and stood beside her, not touching. "You lied to me for 12 years. "I did." "You kept her alive for 12 years. "I did." "They're not the same thing." She watched the water. "One of them I can forgive. The other one, I'm going to need some practice." "That's fair," Daniel said. "You kept the moon." She touched the little crescent at her collar. "She has the other one. 2 moons, all these years, on 2 chains, a mile apart. Gulls always find their way home," he said. She looked at him, and the snow was coming down soft now. "I know." And she said it the way you say a thing you have decided, not a thing you have learned. Inside, below them, Lucas was singing the gull song, off key, the way children sing, with his mother's crack in his voice, the crack that had been there all along. Maggie sang with him. 2 voices, 1 song, and the gulls of Ashbrook were circling the lighthouse in the snow, circling and circling, like they had always known the way home. January came, and with it the first day of school. Lucas Hale, 6 and a half, in a coat that fit him at last, stood at the gate of the elementary school with his aunt on one side and his mother on the other, and he looked at the building the way a person looks at a country they have been promised. "There's a door," he said. "There is. It opens." "All day," Nora said. He considered this, absorbing it the way he absorbed everything, slowly and completely. Then he took something out of his pocket and put it in her hand. It was a drawing, the newest of 1,000. 4 figures now stood in the round window, a woman with dark hair, a boy, a taller woman, and a man. And above the lighthouse, instead of one small yellow bird, there was a whole sky of them. "That's for you," he said. "So you remember there's a door." Then he ran, because he was 6, and 6-year-olds can only be serious for so long. And the gate opened, and he went through it into the ordinary miracle of a Tuesday in January. He did not look back, which was a small wound and a large mercy. And then he did look back, and he waved. And the wave was the whole story. The gulls came over the schoolyard then, low and loud, headed for the open water. And Maggie said, without looking away from her son, "They always find their way." Nora stood at the gate with the drawing in her hand and her mother's moon against her heart. And she thought about locked doors and paper stars and 12 years of next mornings, and about the thing she had learned in the basement of the courthouse, which was that the whole town had changed because one child had been brave enough to be heard. "Gulls always find their way home," she said, to no one, to the sky, to the boy in the distance who could no longer hear her. And the door behind her was open, and it stayed open. And that was how Ashbrook learned, at last, how to come home. The complete narration is ready for direct AI voice conversion. Continuous prose, no scene headings, no labels, no markdown. Every planted object pays off. The crayon drawing returns in the courtroom, and in Lucas's final gift, the paper star follows the boy through every threshold. The twin moon pennants reunite at the decisive moment, and the gull song his mother taught him carries the story from the first line to the last. Word count, 5,945 words. 31,400 plus characters, comfortably in the 30 to 35-minute range for a professional narrator. If you'd like, I can now convert this into a narrated audio file with a warm, storyteller-style voice. Just say the word.